When society is broken and demands for justice go unmet, these people don't shut up.
Pour la France!
They don't give up.
We are here, we are not going anywhere!
They rise up.
And I am gonna stand and fight!
These are their stories. Tonight. It's a fight for justice as 250,000 people take to the streets of France. In a protest designed to bring down a government. France is on fire.
It was a brutal street fight that one does not associate with the country of France, let alone the great city of Paris.
Get the story from those who were there.
They used a lot of tear gas. On this single day, they used 10,000 grenades.
Several of my friends went to prison. Others were seriously injured, so it was very violent.
Rise up. The Yellow Vest protest. It's May 7th, 2017. France has just elected 39-year-old Emmanuel Macron as its youngest ever president. A man who promises change to make life better for the middle and working classes in France.
He's young, he's handsome. He represented a certain degree of hope, and I have to say that his election victory reminded me quite a lot of that of Obama in America in 2010.
Ils attendent que nous portions une nouvelle espérance, un nouvel humanisme, celui d'un monde plus sûr, d'un monde de liberté défendue, d'un monde de croissance, de plus de justice, de plus d'écologie.
But then it didn't take long for the mood to change.
In the months that follow, many French voters start seeing some discrepancies between what Macron promised and what he's actually doing.
Macron has very strict austerity economic policies that made him seem somewhat out of touch with the working people and the middle classes.
He alienated a good number of people who voted for him fairly early on, because one of the first policies he introduced was the scrapping of a wealth tax, which basically meant 1% of the richest people here in France would be allowed to pay less taxes. That then caused quite a number of people to dub him President of the Rich.
It's like betraying all those who voted you in. People anticipate change, but the opposite occurs.
Macron does bring change, but the kind that for many people makes life harder. In January 2018, 8 months into his presidency, Macron raises the tax on diesel, the most commonly used vehicle fuel in France, by 6%. But that year, global oil prices surge. By October, the overall price has risen by 23% to over $6 per gallon. Macron said the tax raise was to help the economy and the environment. But now, that decision is hurting the pocketbooks of those Macron promised to help.
Now, this had a particular impact on the working people of rural France. It didn't really affect rich people in Paris who don't have a long commute to work.
So I'm affected. I live in the countryside and I do a lot of driving.
We're all affected. I also have a car.
It makes me extremely angry because they always give more to the richest and always give less to the poorest. And we cannot go on like this.
People just start to get fed up and they express their frustration.
By October 2018, the anger with Macron's fuel tax hike is building online.
Bonjour à tous. Alors, je viens faire une petite vidéo coup de gueule.
A woman called Jacqueline Moreau, who had no previous political experience, filmed herself criticizing the French government and calling on Macron to drop the fuel tax.
On va où? On est traqué. On monte dans notre voiture de toute façon. On est considéré comme quelqu'un qui va potentiellement payer. Mais qu'est-ce que vous faites du pognon? À part changer la vaisselle de l'Élysée ou vous faire construire des piscines?
Her video went viral. It was seen 6 million times on YouTube and it made her an overnight sensation.
At the same time, an online petition to scrap the fuel tax by 33-year-old small business owner Priscilla Ladowski attracts hundreds of thousands of signatures.
She put a great deal of time and energy in getting people to sign this petition, and it allowed her to communicate with more than 1 million people. This is something that hadn't happened in years.
Chose qui n'arrivait pas depuis des années.
On October 27th, the growing discontent finally finds a focal point, thanks to a truck driver named Eric Drouet.
Eric Drouet created a Facebook event calling on people to march across France on the 17th of November to protest the fuel tax. And from that point, the movement really started to grow.
Et en fait,
there were people who were quite visible on social media and were able to share information with a large audience.
diffuser de l'information en masse.
Alors, j'ai pas la télé chez moi. I don't have a TV, so it was through Facebook. I saw that a lot of people were beginning to talk about it. I was interested, and then I got into it.
As support for a fuel tax protest grows online, they unite around a powerful symbol.
Ghislain Coulthard made a video. Inside his van was a yellow vest.
On a tous un gilet jaune. Un petit code couleur pour montrer que vous êtes d'accord avec nous, avec le mouvement. Tout là, sur les tableaux de bord, c'est un signe. Ça va vraiment peut-être bouger, c'est pas que des paroles en l'air.
Under French law, all drivers are required to have a yellow vest in their vehicles, in their trucks, in their cars. They're supposed to wear them during an emergency. And in a sense, it summed up the ethos of the movement itself.
It's October 31st, and Maxime Nicole adds his voice to growing calls for the protest, now less than 3 weeks away.
I started a page called Flyrider Blockage Info to show people why they must leave home, why we need change.
Pourquoi il fallait attendre que ça commence. S'organiser pour que ça commence et que ça dure, c'est surtout ça, il faut que ça dure. Ce groupe a...
And this group grew to 180,000 people in a few weeks, just prior to November 17th. It changed my life and allowed me to fight for my rights.
m'a permis de me battre pour mes droits. Monsieur Macron a pris 4 jours de vacances. Quand il va revenir de ses vacances, j'espère qu'il s'est bien reposé, parce qu'il va avoir du boulot, je vous le dis.
We hoped that it would work. We hoped that people would show up.
It's Saturday, November 17th, 2018. Vast numbers of people don yellow vests and begin to gather in towns and cities across France to protest against the government's fuel tax raise.
It was as if we were all putting on the same uniform. We were all part of the same clan.
We just realized that, wow, something big is happening here. I thought to myself, I'm part of the resistance.
Maxime spends the day tracking the action from his hometown of Dinan, 250 miles west of Paris.
So during that entire first day, everybody in that group kept posting videos and pictures, and so I knew it was happening everywhere, in all the major cities and all the little towns, and I realized the magnitude of it all.
At an estimated 300,000 people nationwide, it's France's largest demonstration in decades. The Yellow Vest protest unites young and old, black and white, people across the political spectrum.
We could see many people from very different backgrounds. There were also many people who had never been engaged in politics before.
We all just felt like we had finally managed to unite to fight our common enemy. That enemy being those who govern us, but always choose money over the people. It was really powerful.
The protest is as revolutionary as it is diverse. A few people, like Maxime, have led the call to demonstrate, but otherwise there's no defined leadership, by design.
Being a yellow vest means having a common interest, and nobody can take a decision on behalf of anyone.
But the Yellow Vest protest is more than just a march. Organizers also call on drivers to cause maximum disruption to France's roads.
The straw that broke the camel's back was this gas price hike. So these people chose the roads. They blocked the roads with their vehicles, they blocked roads with their bodies, and it caused massive disruption, and it was very effective.
So on the first day, I was on one of the roundabouts in my town. And so what did the police try to do? They came and asked us to leave, as we were blocking the road, which is illegal. And since there were many of us, we told them we weren't going to move, and there's nothing you can do about it.
From small rural towns to the nation's capital, the Yellow Vests completely paralyzed the country, making headlines in the process.
The Yellow Vests demonstrators blockaded major roads, causing gridlock.
As protesters, or Gilets jaunes,
gathered across the country to raise their voices about soaring fuel prices. And it's President Macron who's taking the blame.
There were more than 3,000 blockade points in the whole of France. It was happening everywhere. So the whole day, I kept trying to keep the people that were with me updated on the situation.
Ça va durer longtemps, on va être fatigué, il va pas falloir lâcher. Parce qu'on a plus à y gagner qu'à y perdre.
En fait, je pense que
I think that the government was a bit taken by surprise. They didn't expect this, so they didn't know how to respond either.
Faut que tout le monde s'en aille.
The Yellow Vests' aim of maximum disruption is succeeding. In Paris, police begin to push back against thousands of protesters. Tension fills the streets. A tension that will soon turn violent. It's Saturday, November 17th, 2018. In Paris, clashes are erupting between police and the Yellow Vest protesters, demonstrating against the government's fuel tax raise.
It started to become dangerous, you see. We went to support a positive cause, but finally, lots of police turn up firing tear gas. There were confrontations.
The government's response, including the deployment of police, angered protesters. And while the movement aimed to be a peaceful protest, quickly some violence emerged.
Across the country, 585 civilians and 115 police are injured. As the enormity of what's just happened starts to sink in across the country, the government stays silent. They issue no response to the protesters' demands and announce no plans to drop the proposed fuel tax.
On Monday, the government addressed the situation. They said that people would go back to work, that things would calm down, that it was not a massive issue.
The government's seeming indifference only fuels the anger of those who marched that Saturday.
And that encouraged them to keep going, and actually many more people were joining the movement.
On social media, they begin planning another demonstration for the coming Saturday.
Now that we're here, we're not moving. So with a group of volunteers, we tried to disseminate information.
Le mouvement continue bien et gardez le moral. On se bat pour les libertés de tout le monde, les vôtres y compris. Vous nous entendez peut-être pas, mais nous, on vous écoute.
That Saturday, November 24th, once again, thousands of Yellow Vest protesters come out in force across France to protest the government's fuel tax. They're calling today's protest Act 2.
Bon bah voilà, Voilà la réponse.
This time, Maxime has made the 250-mile trip from his hometown of Dinan to Paris.
Why Paris? Because it's the capital city, and that's where political decisions are made. And once there, the atmosphere was completely different.
Unlike the previous week's protest, this time the authorities are prepared. And things start to boil over between yellow vests and the police much more quickly.
We were down on the Champs-Élysées, and basically, the police was told to disperse the crowd, so they launched some gas and used their truncheons to hit people as well. After that, tempers started to flare, and some of the protesters retaliated.
Just yards away from Maxime, on Paris's iconic Champs-Élysées Boulevard, journalist Mark Bettinelli also gets caught up in unexpected scenes of violence.
I was in the middle of the Champs-Élysées, and it was full of barricades around me and fires. And I was like, what the
The police upped the ante, turning water cannons on the crowds.
I am a former military man. I was part of the French army, but I never went to war. But that day, on the Champs-Élysées, it really felt like we were at war. There were weapons aimed at us. The police force was shooting at us. Some women were beaten on the ground.
The most iconic street in the City of Lights, now lit by fires, throughout a night marked by violence.
Usually you go to a protest, it lasts for maybe a few hours. But this day, I was there in the early morning, and it was really dark when I went home. I took a shower, and even the water was smelling tear gas.
On Sunday, France will wake up to streets full of debris, the aftermath of the day's clashes, estimated at over $1 million worth of damage. But the political price paid by the French government is also steep. Macron's approval rating crashes to 23%.
Even though people had been out on the streets for 2 weeks in their thousands, Macron still hadn't spoken. The only answer provided by Emmanuel Macron consisted of tear gas and the use of war weapons in the French territory.
I remember thinking, whoa, this is a really big deal, and this is a massive problem for the French government because people have coalesced around an idea that directly challenges government policy, and the government looked all at sea over it.
With the country still smoldering from the weekend's clashes, Macron's government decides it can no longer ignore the protests. On November 27th, 3 days after the second protest, they finally decide to reach out to the Yellow Vest movement. But there's a problem. Reach out to whom?
It was actually difficult for the government because they had no clearly identified leader. It was also difficult to know who to negotiate with.
The government combs through social media posts to identify key Yellow Vest members. One of them is Maxime.
I received a message from the Prime Minister's secretary. I got on the phone to some of the others. We were really scratching our heads, thinking, what should we do? So we decided to present 8 representatives to the government, women and men.
Maxime, along with 7 others, is invited to sit down with ministers in an effort to strike a deal. The Yellow Vests agree to meet under one condition.
We said, if you want us to come, it has to be recorded live, so that people can listen to what is being said. And they refused to film it live. They said, it's not possible. We want to see you, but just you and us. So we said, then we're not coming.
Any hope of the government backing down vanishes, which means the next Saturday, December 1st, the Yellow Vests will have to suit up and rise again. It's time for Act 3.
The second act wasn't even the worst one. The third act was insane.
Vraiment énorme, mais il y a eu plusieurs actes importants. Il y a eu
On December 1st, 2018, the Yellow Vests returned to the streets of France for Act 3 of their now weekly uprising. What started as a fuel tax protest is becoming a movement against a broader range of government policies. Policies that protesters believe are punishing the working classes.
There were lots of other things. There were issues with pensions, taxes, there's lots more. There's education, there's health. Money isn't going where it should be in order to help the population.
As thousands of marching Yellow Vests demand the resignation of President Macron, police in Paris stand by, ready to respond.
So people had already experienced the violence from the second demonstration. They'd already seen the behaviour of the police. It was obvious very early on that the police wanted to shut it down.
But now, protesters are getting smarter, employing new tactics to frustrate and defy the police.
What was extremely striking during the Yellow Vests demonstrations was that the people were equipped with gas masks, safety glasses, helmets, protective equipment, because they knew that they would be attacked by the police forces.
Usually in a protest, people follow one path. But during this protest, people were really spreading around, and a huge area was covered with protest. So you were basically walking from one street to another, and you were discovering a new battleground every 2 streets, and that was really powerful.
And where police and protesters collide, violence flares up.
They carry truncheons. I was hit by one. They push you back with their shields. I was pushed over and trampled by police using a shield.
They used a lot of tear gas. On this single day, they used 10,000 grenades of tear gas. And I'm not sure we've seen that in years or maybe decades.
Hands and feet were completely blown off. A lot of people have lost eyes. These are injuries you shouldn't get in a civilized country like France.
And on the 1st of December, the police response was really, really hard on people.
Hundreds of people across France sustain injuries. The property damage to Paris is estimated to be 3 times the last protest at $3 million.
It looked like Paris was burning.
In the aftermath, the people of France placed the blame directly on President Macron and his police.
One of the features of this whole protest movement is the robust nature of what the police did. Some say they were unnecessarily heavy-handed.
Several of my friends went to prison because of that. Others were seriously injured. So it was very, very violent.
On n'a pas de haine contre vous! On vous demande d'être avec nous! Pour le peuple! Pour la France!
Despite the violence, despite the petrol bombings, the trashed cars, the beaten up homes and shops, the protest movement retained massive popular support. It never dipped below 70% when it comes to approval across France.
It's December 4th. With support for the Yellow Vests running high, the government makes a dramatic U-turn. They announce an immediate suspension of the raised fuel tax, the policy that sparked the whole movement.
It was surprising that the government gave in, because the government was between this strong movement of the Yellow Vest, but also they didn't want to give the impression to their voters that they were giving concessions.
President Macron hopes that if he gives the protesters what they want, they'll end this cycle of weekly demonstrations. But he's badly mistaken.
We knew that it was only to calm the situation, but people realised that this tax is not the only problem in France, but that we are facing a true social injustice.
This wasn't just about the price of gas. There were lots of other things at play, and this was just another element. Rather than saying, that's it, we've won, we can keep up the pressure and really get things changed.
On peut leur mettre une pression et on peut faire changer les choses.
At the end of the day, Macron, he didn't win because he didn't stop the protest at all.
People were still active on social networks, and we couldn't wait to get out again.
Les manifestations ont repris.
Je peux te dire, il y a du monde à Bâle.
After 3 straight Saturdays of protest, French President Macron caves in to the Yellow Vest protesters, canceling the increase in the fuel tax. But it's not enough.
The problem is that climb down did not placate or mollify the protesters. Indeed, it encouraged them to press on and to seek more concessions from the government.
Et donc en fait, c'est tout ce ras-le-bol qui a fait que...
So we're all fed up, and we're saying, no, this isn't enough. Just because they tell us, okay, we'll drop taxes, no, there are other things. So we'll keep talking about it. We'll go out into the streets until they do as much as they can to improve the lives of citizens.
Les conditions de vie des citoyens soient meilleures.
The Christmas holidays are just 3 weeks away, but France braces itself for its 4th weekend of protest.
The mood in Paris today has been gloomy. A sense of dread and preparations for the worst were acknowledgements that there's little reason to believe the events of last Saturday won't be repeated tomorrow. When we arrived in Paris, the situation was obviously tense. There were armed soldiers around the Champs-Élysées, around the Arc de Triomphe. It was quite disconcerting. There was a sense of Paris, this great European capital, being somewhat under siege. Everyone was expecting a big weekend, and there was nothing being done to prevent this large gathering, which seemed inevitable, which seemed foreboding, and there was nothing to stop it.
Even as France prepares itself for more violence, President Macron remains silent. He still hasn't addressed the nation about the crisis engulfing their capital. Overnight, thousands of protesters descend on Paris. By early morning, the streets are full of yellow vests, and police are ready for them. Once again, the battle is resumed.
It's been promising this all morning, but the tear gas has been deployed now, and lots of it over the last 10 minutes. It's been canister after canister that have been launched into the crowds.
Après, nous, on a la BAC en France. C'est un type de police.
In France, we have the BAC, Anti-Criminal Brigade Unit, and they're real cowboys. They arrive on the scene. They insult us. They aim their guns at us. They're dangerous. They rattle the crowd. In general, the Yellow Vests aren't violent. The BAC winds us up, and then it boils over.
Paris is an immensely charming city all year round, but at Christmas time it's particularly charming. There's normally a fantastic festive atmosphere, but this was very different. These chic streets were turned into a battleground where there were burning cars in front of the Arc de Triomphe. Not what you expected to see there. It was brutal. It was a brutal street fight that one does not associate with the country of France, let alone the great city of Paris.
Over 1,000 arrests are made, and 118 people are injured.
If the government's decision to back down on the hated fuel tax rise was a peace offering, then this afternoon that olive branch went up in flames. do you want President Macron to do?
Move. He need to move now. He need to
resign.
Yes, of course. You don't hear the people. Macron démission. Macron démission.
On the international stage, Macron is a highly regarded world leader. But at home, his popularity plummets. 4 Saturdays of protests, and he's yet to address the nation directly.
Que ça faisait 2 semaines que les gens sortaient dans la rue par centaines.
In those weeks, thousands of people had been going out into the streets. And I said to myself, this is weird. They have to talk. They have to start a dialogue. So I started to imagine how the discussion would go if you got the government and the yellow vests in the same room. What would they say about these accusations?
À toutes ces accusations entre guillemets que le peuple lui fait.
D-Ace writes a rap to vent his feelings. It drops December 9th, the day after the demonstrations. 48 hours later, it gets 1 million hits.
Laisse-moi mettre mon gilet jaune. Laisse-moi mettre mon gilet jaune. Et ce truc-là, c'est plus qu'un gilet. Je le mets pour défendre mes idées. Laisse-moi mettre mon gilet jaune.
Finally, the criticism, violence, and damage in the millions of dollars all compel Macron to break his silence. On December 10th, he makes an address to the nation on French television. For a French president, this is highly unusual.
Unlike the States, it's very rare for the President of France to look directly into the camera and speak to the nation. But the fact that he did it showed clearly that he was out of options. He was losing control.
I mean, he had to do it. It was unavoidable. It was everywhere in the news. People were really a lot to protest, so he had to speak.
The speech was quite unprecedented and in its tone and gravity. And it really conjured up the image of a country in a state of emergency.
The speech is watched by over 20 million people, just over a third of France's population. It's one of the largest TV audiences for a political speech in French history.
L'année prochaine. Le salaire d'un travailleur au SMIC augmentera de 100 € par mois dès 2019.
Macron increases the minimum wage by 100 euros a month, a surprising move. This determined, at times stubborn president has made a huge concession. Even before he's finished his speech, the most important yet of his presidential career, the yellow vests take to social media. Has he offered enough? Is their fight over? The fate of the movement hangs in the balance. In the wake of President Macron's unprecedented speech and his offer to raise the minimum wage, the Yellow Vest protesters' response is a resounding, so what?
Encore une fois, c'est que du blabla en fait.
It was more blah, blah, blah. He didn't understand the people. He's like a king in his castle, throwing down breadcrumbs to the poor, saying, be quiet. But he doesn't understand that we don't want a king throwing breadcrumbs. We want to have the whole cake.
Et nous, manger les miettes de pain. Nous, on veut partager tout le gâteau.
Maxime Nicole, known as Fly Rider and one of the movement's founders, holds a live Facebook forum to discuss Macron's olive branch of cuts. Instead of dousing the flames of unrest by offering up concessions, Macron has just added fuel to the fire. Now, the Yellow Vests want more.
C'est un appel à continuer tout ce qu'on est en train de faire, dans le sens où ça commence à montrer des signes de faiblesse. Et du coup, ça veut dire qu'on a de plus en plus de chances, par nos actions, par notre détermination. Les miettes sont en train de tomber, le pain est en train de se rapprocher, il n'y a plus qu'à tendre la main, rester déterminé pour aller choper la baguette.
The Yellow Vests discovered with Macron's address to the nation that they were in fact winning, and they decided that this was their time to call for more. There was no leader to say to the French government, to say to the French president, thanks very much, that's enough, we've got what we want and we'll go home now. Instead, these People decided, look, we haven't been doing well for decades. This is our moment. Let's keep the thing going. Let's see how much we can get out of the French president.
He gave some concessions, which represented a lot of money, but it didn't stop the protest.
Protesters prepare for another weekend, Act 5. Again, thousands assemble across France. To keep the Yellow Vests motivated, key people in the movement, such as Priscilla Ladowski, who first wrote the petition to scrap the fuel tax, have come to Paris.
Ce mouvement n'appartient à personne et à tout le monde. Il est l'expression d'un peuple qui, depuis 40 ans, se voit dépossédé de tout ce qui lui permettait de croire en son avenir et en sa grandeur. Nous sommes épuisés par une pression fiscale colossale qui ôte à notre pays, à nos entrepreneurs, à nos artisans, à nos petits commerçants, à nos créateurs et à nos travailleurs toute énergie pendant qu'une petite élite échappe constamment à l'impôt.
Vive la France, vive la République et vive les gens! Vive les gens!
France prepares itself for its fifth act. The demonstrations again become violent.
In other parts of the city, crowds were pushed back and hemmed in for hours, police refusing to let anyone leave. Parts of central Paris brought to a standstill. The standoff between people and president goes on, despite the government making concessions, tax cuts, and a rise in the minimum wage.
Macron made a speech on Monday, and what he said wasn't enough, and he didn't understand the people, because it's not just a question of money.
The smaller scale of the protests today suggests the Yellow Vest movement is losing momentum, at least for now. But the underlying anger, the political demands, haven't gone away.
But with the lack of a leader, the direction the Yellow Vests should take looks unclear. With so many protesters and so many grievances against the state, the movement risks losing focus.
The movement begins to have different ideas about what it is they're exactly fighting for. The leadership weren't necessarily singing from the same hymn sheet. Different leaders back different parts of the movement. And I saw this myself when, attending protests as a journalist. You'd find on a given weekend that one of the so-called leaders would ask their followers to meet at, let's say, the Champs-Élysées, whereas another protest leader would, on the same day in the same city, ask them to meet in a different part of the city and protest for different demands.
January 2019, a new year. Despite internal cracks within the movement, the Yellow Vests haven't packed up and gone away. The deadlock between the protesters and the government continues.
Despite government concessions, tax breaks, and a rise in the minimum wage, the Yellow Vest movement is not fading. The reasons behind the rage on the streets haven't gone away.
Yellow, we're here, and later again, next. Yes, of course.
Every week?
Every week, if we can. Every week.
That iconic symbol of France, the Arc de Triomphe, shrouded in clouds of tear gas as the anger and confrontation continue. The weekly protests are now into their third month, and the clashes between protesters and police are often brutal.
But what Macron's government decided it had to do in the new year of 2019 was launch what they called the Great Debate. And the Great Debate was a nationwide initiative whereby government representatives would hold really town hall meetings in towns and cities across France, and this lasted for around 4 months here in France. Interestingly, it didn't really go down that well with the Yellow Vest because It cost several millions of euros to pull this Great Debate idea off, as in just paying for the logistics.
The Great Debate didn't do anything other than make people believe they were being listened to. It went in one ear and out the other. They didn't hear what we were saying.
And in fact, the Great Debate, well, it was attended by, a good number of people. It wasn't really the people that it was aimed at. So the Yellow Vests, and certainly the leadership of the Yellow Vests and the most prominent people within the movement, stayed well away from the Great Debate. Macron still had a lot of work to do in order to be able to quell the protests that continued for several more months.
While the reception of the Great National Debate was mixed, it did a lot to reduce the numbers of protesters. It showed that the government had made a concerted effort to speak to the population.
But Macron does go one further than the concessions he made in December. In April 2019, he promises 5 billion euros in tax cuts and proposes to reform education and local government. But the stalemate that Macron and the Yellow Vests find themselves in continues. There is support for the Yellow Vests, but after a year and a half of protests, some in France have grown weary of the constant disruption and damage that often goes hand in hand with their demonstrations.
There was a demonstration by a new group that emerged called the Red Scarves, and these were people who basically had enough of the Yellow Vests and wanted these protests to stop. And these were people that just felt that they'd had enough of the week-on-week disruption, but also they felt that it was terrible for the image of France, what some Yellow Vests are doing, particularly the violent elements.
The number of Yellow Vest protesters would rise and fall across 2019 and 2020, but they'd never again reach the same numbers as when the movement started in November of 2018. Still, the protests continue and have become for many a way of life.
The Yellow Vests really shook Macron's presidency quite early on and dealt a blow to his presidency. His popularity was restored after that to an extent, but this large-scale political crisis had a long-lasting effect. The Yellow Vest movement had a long-term impact on trust in institutions and trust in government.
It seems the Yellow Vest movement has awoken a political consciousness that had been missing from French life.
For many people, it was like first walk into the political arena. Like people were feeling involved in some way, and they really felt like they were doing their job as citizens also. So many of them, it was not violent at all. They were on social media. It really sparked some new careers as citizens.
To this day, you still see Yellow Vest protests cropping up here and there, and it's a warning to President Macron that we haven't gone away, we're watching you, and just be careful. It's a warning to him that governments are in democracies, governments are there to serve the people and not the other way around.
Les gouvernements, d'une manière générale, que ce soit en France, aux États-Unis, en Angleterre, peu importe.
I think that governments as a whole, whether that be in France, in the States, wherever, they have to be careful about how they govern, because behind their laws, behind their actions, there are real people who suffer the consequences. You have to listen to them. That's why we have a democracy. The power belongs to the people to a certain extent. Politicians are elected in by us. They can't just do as they wish, because they didn't get there by accident. We put you there.
C'est des gens qui ont été élus par nous.
Laisse-moi mettre mon gilet jaune. Laisse-moi mettre mon gilet jaune. Et ce truc-là, c'est plus qu'un gilet. Je le mets pour défendre mes idées. Laisse-moi mettre mon gilet jaune. Laisse-moi mettre mon gilet jaune. Laisse-moi mettre mon gilet jaune. Et ce truc là c'est plus qu'un gilet. Je le mets pour défendre mes idées. Laisse-moi mettre mon gilet jaune. Ok, très bien, je vais pas tergiverser. Très vite je te fais le topo, beaucoup de paroles.